Non-stop testing at Massey's with E-Dome test to destruction upcoming, air separation unit demolition continues, and the launch site parking lot is now official. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's action-packed RGV aerial photography Starbase Flyover update episode 21. I'm Indnstar, and I'm excited to share some of the amazing things happening at SpaceX's development facility, referred to as Starbase. We've listened to your feedback last week, and we're working on a more concise, higher quality episode with better voiceover audio as promised. Now buckle up and let's get started. Alright, let's begin here at Massey Structural Test Site, where almost all the test stands are currently occupied by various vehicles or test articles, but not for long. Special shout out to Procky for creating these labeled maps for all 4 sites at Starbase. Turns out there have been quite a few changes. Starting off with the booster cryogenic test station, we see booster 11 sitting atop its puck shuck, where we can see its new ullage thrusters in the interstage here. B11 was moved to Massey's last week in the morning of October 12th, as seen in this footage taken by our friend Andrew Gomez from Rocket Ranch. It must be quite something to be there in person. This move was followed by a cryogenic verification test on Friday, October 13th, with its methane and LOX tanks being filled with liquid nitrogen and liquid oxygen respectively, before detanking on the morning of the 14th. Shout out to Starbase Server for capturing Booster 11 undergoing its second cryogenic verification test on Friday, October 18th, in which the LOX tanks was filled. Give him a follow on X. Moving down, we see the ship's cryogenic testing station with Ship 29 missing. Ship 29 was moved back on its puck shucker stand the morning of October 13th before being transferred to a transport stand in the rocket garden. This follows 2 cryogenic proof tests in late September and 1 in early October. After S28, S29 will be the next in line to receive its full complement of engines ahead of static fire testing. Moving down, we see Ship 27's aft dome inside the structural testing cage, which is being used to test upgraded engine shielding. A ventilation supply pipe has been connected to it, indicating work is going on inside the vehicle. Permanent stairs have also been added to the jail test stand. This newly designed engine shielding has already been installed onto Ship 25 and is anticipated to be included on all future ships. The new shielding has additional welds as seen on the right in this ground photo pointed out by the ring watchers. Zooming in closer to this render by the space engineer, we see the newly upgraded design of the space aft section, along with these holes that were cut beneath the engine shielding for an unknown reason. We can expect this article to have its engine shielding tested with simulated staging and/or re-entry forces, the failure of which would probably mean a similar projected failure of Ship 25. Over to the left, we can see Ship 24.2 waiting its turn in the structural testing cage, as we alluded to last week. Just below S24.2, we can see the hot stage test article, which has had its hot staging ring removed from Booster 11's old forward dome simulator. All the way at the top of Massey sits the E-Dome, or elliptical dome test article, at the burst pad, which has already been hooked up with pipework ahead of its cryogenic test. Based on the location, this may even be a test to destruction. Moving back to the right side, we finish Massey's with the new building under construction, which has received additional horizontal and vertical steel beams. What do you think this will be for? Let us know in the comments. That's all for Massey's. On to the Sanchez site, where a rather important structure is being demolished. Here at Sanchez, there are quite a few noteworthy changes to cover this week. Take a look at this labeled map to get a feel for what's what at this site. This may be a refresher for most of you, but new to those just joining the channel. Now that you're familiar with Sanchez, taking a look down at the far west corner of the site, we see good progress is being made on sheathing the ground fabrication building. Roof panels are now going on the left side, and we can see the siding now extends around to the front of the building as well. To the left of the building, we can see the windbreak formed by the shipping containers that were spotted last week. Still no tent overhead, but behind the containers we can see what looks like parts for possibly another white stand like the one being built just next door to this area. Between the roof structure in the center of the building, we can see what appears to be 5 of the legs that used to sit outside next to these positioned over here. Over in the stand construction lot, we have a few observable changes worth noting. At the top, it doesn't appear much has changed with the white stand since our last flyover, but we can see some new components next to it. To the left is a raised platform with an interestingly designed edge. This looks similar to the platform identified a few weeks ago being loaded onto the flatbed truck, if you recall. Two of the sides are curved, leading us to believe this platform may be used between two of these stands for ease of movement around boosters. Just beside this platform, we can also see more of the screen safety doors that will be added around the base of the stand and work platform as seen in Mega Bay 1. Speaking of the work platform, we can see it now has received the floor covering that will support the booster technicians. Below those components sit the two black stands still under construction. After receiving the hold-down arms that will support the weight of the booster, we can now see the clamps being added to the arms of the stand on the left. These clamps look quite similar to those used on the OLM, which are actuated via small hydraulic cylinders in the center, along with turnbuckles on both ends to lock the clamp in place and provide extra support. This would be a huge time saver for SpaceX crews if this stand is used for transport purposes to and from the various sites. Crews currently have to manually connect and disconnect all clamping hardware when transporting vehicles, which is a labor and time-intensive task. On the right, we can see the hold-down arms for the second stand staged beside it. Up in the scrapyard, we can see the old nose cone and booster aft sections that were visible on the left in the last flyover are now gone, or at least no longer in one piece anyway. Taking a look at the unique jig first spotted a few weeks ago, it appears a few parts are now missing from it as well. A host of ring and transport stands still remains in the area though. Which ones are destined for scrapping, we can't be certain, but it certainly appears that the two older booster stands could be the ones on the chopping block if those two new black stands being constructed are replacements. Lastly, seen here is what appears to be the old two-point lifting jig for ships. With a better design now on site and in use, it looks like SpaceX is ready to move on from the old tile wrecker. Above the scrapyard, we see some substantial trench working is occurring in the areas recently cleared. Currently, the trench extends from the power substation area to the north and east down towards the ground fabrication building. The leading theory currently is that this could be the power supply for that building. The direction of the trench certainly seems to indicate that. The size of the trench is a little perplexing, however. Hopefully we'll have a better idea after the next flyover. Up at the substation, we can see what looks to be another foundation under construction. Lots of conduit is being laid in the trench on the right-hand side, which is similar to what we've seen for the sheds just next to this area in the right. A structure similar to those housing electrical equipment may be on the way. Check out the load of conduit Irma captured in this ground photo in front of Sanchez by Highway 4. Could this be destined for that trench and substation work? Over at the air separation plant, we can see demolition work has been ongoing since our last flyover. All remaining cooling towers that were supporting the operation are now gone. We can also see a good amount of plumbing missing as well. It certainly appears that SpaceX may be abandoning the idea of separating and using their own cryogenics. Whether it's for financial, space-saving, or even capability purposes, we're not sure. But until we see additional equipment show up on site or elsewhere near Starbase, this project looks to be dead. Just beside the air separation plant, in the water treatment area, we can see some minor changes have occurred with the 4 tanks that were spotted here back on the 6th. Components that were being stored inside the 4 tanks appear to have been removed, revealing more of the internal structure for each tank. It looks like some of the plumbing work may be occurring to the left of the tanks as well. We're continuing to monitor these to see if the idea of wastewater treatment for these comes to fruition. We'll finish off Sanchez in traditional fashion by taking a peek at the Rocket Garden, now home of Ship 29 in addition to Booster 4 and Ship 20. Next to B4, we can see the ship puck shucking stand with the SPMTs used to transport Ship 29 back from Massey's on the 13th. Ship 29 will now reside beside Ship 20 until its turn on the engine installation stand comes around. It appears SpaceX isn't waiting for that time to come before performing additional upgrades, however. Take a look at this ground photo shot from just a short distance away on Remedios Avenue. Remember those weld marks the ring washers picked up on that indicate engine shielding upgrades? It appears crews have already started those upgrades just a few days since the ship returned from Massey's. As far as Ship 28 is concerned, little has changed from our viewpoint. Lots of tile work remains around the weld seams. Well, that's a wrap for Sanchez. Time to head over to the build site where we finally see some important pieces of the Mega Bay 2 puzzle in place. Starting off with this angled shot of the megabays and high bay, we can see that the cranes have been hard at work this past week, lifting vertical staircase segments, cladding for the walls, and steel onto the roof of Megabay 2. Notably, on the 13th to 14th of October, the first, second, and third bridge crane rails were lifted into the megabay. The rails act as the beams on which the bridge crane trolleys will run along, transporting booster segments along the length and width of Megabay 2. The trolleys themselves have been installed as well, and the entire assembly can be seen clearly here in this shot from behind the build site. After these cranes have finally been installed, we can expect the entire roof to be covered with roofing panels and the floor of the future office space just below to be poured with concrete, just like we saw with Megabay 1 in 2022. Now, let's take a look at what SpaceX is doing in the Megabay. First off, Booster 10 is still having its engines installed in the back of the bay on the new engine installation stand after a round of cryo testing last month. Booster 12 is in front but isn't visible. We can see the oddly shaped platform installed next to the white stand. Meanwhile, the younger Booster 13 remains 20 out of 24 rings tall. And that's a wrap for the Megabay. From the other angle, we can see new lines marked on the floor and some work going on over on the right-hand side. Could the next white engine install stand be destined for this corner of MB1? Now, let's head over to the high bay, which is home to a brand new ship as well as the fully stacked Ship 30 and 31, which can be seen here. The 4-ring payload bay section was moved into the high bay, and we'll have to take to the air to see Ship 32's nose cone, which was actually in the middle of stacking onto the section at the time of the flyover. It was also subsequently stacked onto its forward dome on the morning of the 18th. Speaking of Ship 32, we can actually see what we believe to be its mid-lock section here in the ring yard, right next to this section which has rectangles cut all over it. These sections were produced a few months ago before the demolition of Tents 1 and 2 to make way for the Star Factory, which is where we're going next. Rotating over to this top-down shot, we notice that the trenches dug for the laying of conduit cables last week are starting to be covered up again. In addition, vertical steel columns have been installed all the way to the very right side of the taller section of Star Factory. And in case any of you are wondering, the Ship 22 crew interior mock-up still sits by the Starling factory with no visible changes. Do something already! Scratch that, Indnstar from the future here to tell you that Ship 22 had its forward flaps removed on October 19th and was rolled to the rocket garden 3 days later for an unknown reason. Next, let's head over to see Ship 25 and Booster 7, as well as Ship 26 over at the launch site. Before we head over there, give this video a like if you've learned something new. Here's a map outlining the different areas of interest for those of you unfamiliar with the launch site. Getting down to business over on the suborbital side of the site, we see a fully lined and marked parking lot is now in place for employees and contractors. The lampposts are even in place already, or at least some of them, which is mostly seen in the long shadows cast by the early morning sun. If we take a look at a comparison from the 14th of September to now and note how the trenches we spotted earlier line up with the newly painted lines, it appears that these could actually be used for electrical conduit to power future light poles. We can't see any visual signs of lamps going in these locations just yet, but they could be on the way. As far as the entrance to the parking lot is concerned, this may receive concrete instead of asphalt for better handling of the heavy cryo transport tankers delivering to the suborbital farm. Speaking of the entrance, when we slide over and look on both sides of Highway 4, where this driveway lies, we can see additional conduit work appears to be underway again, perhaps to supply 3-phase power to the suborbital site. Remember when the trenches were first dug and conduit laid a few months ago? The primary supply went further along Highway 4 before crossing over to the orbital tank farm. On the left side of the highway, we can see a horizontal directional drilling machine set up to bore over to the supply vaults on the opposite side. Sliding down just a little, we see even more excavation work is occurring along the edge of the highway. It's been speculated that SpaceX will be constructing a taller and more secure border wall around the launch site. In addition to the removal of the parking along the highway, the views inside the site may also be in jeopardy as well. While this is disappointing if true, at the end of the day we have to realize how incredibly fortunate we've been to have views from the ground and air to every aspect of the R&D, build, and launch segments of SpaceX's Starbase facility up to this point. Besides, even if we lose some of our ground viewing capabilities, we could still get aerial photos. If only we knew someone who did that. To wrap up the suborbital side, let's talk about what's been going on with Ship 26. As mentioned in our last flyover video, there was a closure on October 9th for anticipated testing of Ship 26. Once the pad was cleared and the road was closed, loading of the LOX tank began and progressed for a short period of time before stopping and a long depress vent occurred. Not long after this vent, however, a frost line appeared around the header tank in the nose cone. While this isn't confirmed and is purely speculation on our part, is it possible SpaceX conducted a transfer of LOX from the main tank to the header tank as a demonstration of capability? Let me know what you think in the comments below. While we don't know if this was the intended conclusion of testing for that day, detanking did occur and the road closure was concluded. All remaining closures for the week would end up being revoked, so no additional testing occurred. A new road closure took effect on Wednesday, October 18th, around 1 p.m. Central Time, and the pad was again cleared. Not long after 3 p.m. Central, LOX loading began on Ship 26. The tank was filled about 1/4 full before a long vent occurred like the previous test. Once again, a frost ring would be seen forming around the header tank at the top of the vehicle. This time, however, we saw a fire from the base of Ship 26 instead of detanking right away. What appeared to be a rare and unexpected pre-burner test of at least one Raptor 2 engine had occurred. Pre-burner tests have never been conducted on a Raptor 2 engine fitted to a vehicle, and this is the first pre-burner test seen at Starbase since Ship 20 back in October of 2021. The mysteries surrounding Ship 26 continue. Will it fly? Will it just die? Are all bets off at this point? Let me know what you want to see happen to the bullet ship in the comments below. Shifting over to the orbital tank farm expansion area now, we can see stacks of pipe racks awaiting placement for plumbing of the soon-to-come horizontal storage tanks. The exact route these tanks will take is unknown at this time. Just behind the security fence in front of the liquid methane storage tanks sits additional plumbing for the newly installed subcoolers at both sides of the tank farm. Zooming in on the two new subcoolers on the methane side, we can see that the pipework for both the inlet and the outlet at the front is still awaiting install. Before shifting over to the other side of the orbital tank farm, let's check in on the upgrades to the Deluge tank farm. Whew, for a moment there I was afraid SpaceX had stacked that new set of high-pressure tanks. No worries, it's still there. Taking a look at the far east side of the launch site, just in front of the dunes, sits the building that houses a lot of the electrical equipment supporting the site. It appears HVAC maintenance or upgrades are occurring. A lot of heat is likely generated in this building, requiring a hefty supply of cool air at all times. Over on the LOX side of the tank farm, though not many observable changes have occurred since our last flyover, one thing we can see is a fabrication of new pipework just behind the LOX storage tank farthest to the right. Finally, we arrive at the orbital launch pad, where we see a destacked Ship 25 and a hot stage ringless Booster 9. At the end of our last video, we mentioned the destacking of Ship 25 following the promo shoot involving the Cybertruck at the pad. The hot stage ring was later removed as well on October 9th. On October 13th, however, action looked to be picking up again here at the orbital side. The booster engine maintenance platform was lowered onto its stand in the early morning hours, a sign that testing may be coming soon. Scaffolding was seen being removed from the OLM near Booster 9's LOX tank later in the day. The major clue came later that night when a Marine Safety Information Bulletin, or MSIB, was posted to warn mariners in the waters near Boca Chica Beach that SpaceX would be conducting test activities on Tuesday, October 17th. With potential closures in place for the next week, the stage was set for more pre-flight test of Booster 9 and Ship 25. The evening of Sunday, October 15th, the LR 11,000 crane was connected to the load spreader, and the hot stage ring was hoisted back to the top of Booster 9. It was anticipated that Ship 25 would join the party the next day. Around lunchtime, on Monday, October 16th, Ship 25 once again took to the skies to complete the full stack ahead of testing. SpaceX would later post on X Monday night their plans to perform a launch rehearsal, providing a good explanation for the restack and MSIB posted for the next day. Check out these incredible drone shots shared by SpaceX with their post. All hope for testing the stack would come to a grinding halt the next day. The full stack would be short-lived as well, sadly. Instead of a road closure and testing on Tuesday the 17th, the closure was canceled in the early morning hours and Ship 25's transport stand rolled back to the OLM. The Ship QD arm also swung away to prepare for the chopsticks to grab the ship, eventually lowering it onto the stand. The Ship QD was never connected to the ship in the time between stacking on the 16th and eventual destacking the next day. Was this a sign of issues with the Ship QD? That much isn't clear. While crews were seen atop the arm the night after the stacking, no work was seen on the arm following the destack. Crews have been seen on lifts scouring various regions of both the ship and booster with intense scrutiny. As of Friday, October 20th, SpaceX conducted a single-engine test fire of Ship 26 to simulate a deorbit burn in low Earth orbit conditions, which was likely achieved through chilling the engine and depressing the tanks to mimic conditions after a long coasting period in space. This adds weight behind the theory that Ship 26 is just a test article and that another ship, likely Ship 28, will be flying for IFT-3. And on Friday, October 20th, Ship 25 was once again stacked onto Booster 9, seen here in this footage taken by our very own RGV cam. Also on Friday afternoon, Cameron County residents were notified of a rare closure for Boca Chica Beach and Highway 4, scheduled to occur Sunday, October 22nd. In the public notice signed by County Judge Eddie Trevino Jr., it stated, quote, "This Sunday closure is necessary based on unique circumstances involving testing of 2 separate starships in preparation for upcoming launch approvals," unquote. This was a welcome sight to Starship fans and certainly provided a renewed sense of hope for approvals coming sooner rather than later for IFT-2. With the pad cleared and road closed on the 22nd, the orbital tank farm came to life for an action-packed afternoon of full stack and launch pad testing. Once all cryo supply lines were properly chilled, with LN2, BN9 underwent its first tanking operation of the day, with both LOX and methane tanks being partially filled. Detanking soon followed, but this wasn't the end of testing as some feared. After a complete detanking, the tank farm in OLM once more came to life for a second partial cryofilling of the tanks on B9. While cryo liquids were never seen visible from the outside of Ship 25, vapors from the engine chill pipework near the top of the booster were visible. Chill down of the piping on the launch tower was also visible, with clouds of cryovapors tailing off in the wind. Following the tanking test of B9, a test of the steel flame detector plate under the OLM was performed. This is the first time we've seen the plate tested since the addition of the third large water storage tank. It's unclear how many gas pressure tanks were connected in time for this test, but this definitely looks like a setup ready to handle 33 Raptor engines at 90% throttle on launch day. Shortly after testing of the plate, purging of the engine compartment on B9 was observed. A total of 4 purges were performed over the span of approximately 2 hours. This is the fire suppression system utilizing the CO2 SpaceX intends to use during the flight to prevent fires from occurring inside the engine bay. Fires surrounding the engines damaged avionics and other hardware during IFT-1 and was in large part responsible for ending the flight so prematurely. Thank you to our friends over at Epic Spaceflight and their 24/7 HoopCam livestream for their footage of the test activities. Thanks also to our friends at Rocket Ranch for this time-lapse of the day's festivities. While this doesn't appear to be a full launch rehearsal, since no additional MSIBs or evacuation notices were issued to our knowledge, it definitely appears SpaceX performed the necessary checkouts to ensure operations go as smoothly as possible when the day comes. With additional closures still on the table in the coming week, we may not have long to wait. A new Marin hazard communication has been posted for launch activities from Boca Chica on November 1st between the hours of 5:25 and 11:15 a.m. Keep in mind, this is in no way an official announcement of a launch date, nor is it an indication that SpaceX has received its amended launch license from the FAA, or will. But let's keep our fingers crossed that the launch rehearsal goes well and the launch license comes sooner rather than later. Now let's talk about what's happening with the Integrated Flight Test 2 or IFT-2 launch license. When launch? Well, in the October 18th Spaceflight Now article regarding SpaceX actively lobbying to streamline the launch license issuance process, Will Robinson-Smith quotes a Fish and Wildlife Services, or FWS, spokesperson who stated that their agency received a final biological assessment from the FAA October 5th, and that the FWS has up to 30 days to review it. However, the reality is that actually issuing a launch license for IFT-2 could still be a ways off. In addition to having up to 30 days to review the final biological assessment, Fish and Wildlife Services then have 135 days to issue their amended biological opinion. So what does all this mean? It means that the Fish and Wildlife Service have over 5 months to review the FAA biological assessment report provided in the first week of October and provide their updated response on the environmental impact specifically caused by the water deluge system under the orbital launch mount. It was reported that the FWS assessment of Starbase's water deluge system began in early August, let's say August 1st. This means that the FWS will have till December 14th, which is 165 days from August 1st, to review the FAA report and provide their final biological opinion. Yeah, that means waiting a couple of more months for SpaceX to be issued an IFT-2 launch license, but it also means that this launch occurs in 2023, which is necessary to keep the overall Artemis program on track, as Starship was chosen as the human landing system for the Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 NASA missions. But here's the kicker. The Fish and Wildlife Service claims that the 165-day timer only started on October 5th, not August 1st. This shifted timeline beginning on October 5th delays the potential for issuance of the launch license till March 18th, 2024. That's insane, as it will definitely have a negative impact on the overall Artemis program timeline. So yes, if the 165-day timer actually starts on October 5th, the date when the Fish and Wildlife Service received the FAA's final biological assessment proves to be true, and barring further extension that the FAA and FWS can agree to do at any point in this process, the earliest IFT-2 could launch is March 2024. However, we anticipate that the Fish and Wildlife Service will issue their final biological opinion earlier than March 2024, based on how quickly the FAA provided their final assessment. Well, that's it for episode 21. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Indnstar, and I want to thank you for joining me as we reviewed all the activity that happened at Starbase this week through the aerial and ground photos taken by RGV Aerial Photography. Take care and see you soon.